Nolan was the only African American in the group. And so it is like making people harken back to the sins of the past in the state of Mississippi. And so I think that's why people are so concerned with getting to the truth.
This morning, the search continues for answers in the death of a Mississippi college athlete who died over the 4th of July weekend on a boating trip to an island with friends.
Nolan Wells is his name. His body was recovered from the water near Horn Island off the Mississippi mainland on Monday. Authorities say Wells was reported missing by his family after the friends he was traveling with didn't return home with him. Now, his family's attorney, Ben Crump, has suggested race may...
Two people were with Nolan Wells in the very last minutes anyone can account for him. And right now, tonight, they are telling two completely different stories. One says Nolan told her he was heading back to the boat to rejoin his friends. The other side, the friends themselves, say Nolan told them he was staying behind with her. Both can't be true. And somewhere in that contradiction is quite possibly the last real information anyone has about what happened to an 18-year-old before he ended up dead in the water off Horn Island. That's not the only thing that's changed. Investigators now say messages were deleted from Nolan's phone before his own mother ever got it back. A sitting judge, whose son was on that boat, has broken months, well, days, of silence with a long, detailed public statement. And on top of all of it, this family is now fighting something that has nothing to do with the actual investigation. AI-generated videos, fabricated entirely, some of them putting words in Nolan's grieving mother's mouth. Tonight we go through every piece of it. What's confirmed? What's still just a claim? And where this investigation actually stands right now. But if you're just joining us, you need the foundation first. So let's go back to where this started. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old, a wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College, out of Ocean Springs, Mississippi. Attorney Ben Crump has added a detail that lands harder every time it's repeated. Nolan was preparing to return for the upcoming football season, and he would have turned 19 next month. He wasn't a kid in crisis. He wasn't somebody with a history that pointed toward anything reckless. By every account from coaches, teammates, and family, he was well-liked, hardworking, and looking forward to a future that, as of July 4th, looked genuinely bright. His mother is Christine Wells Wansley. His father is Elmore Wansley. On the 4th of July, they were expecting a normal holiday. A boat trip. Friends. Nothing more complicated than that. Stage 3, the short version, for anyone just catching up. Horn Island sits roughly 10 miles off the Mississippi Gulf Coast, part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore. It's uninhabited. No houses, no infrastructure, reachable only by boat. On a holiday weekend it fills up fast with boats anchored along the shoreline. Nolan went out there on July 4th with a group of friends, the same way that group had done many times before. He was last seen around 3 p.m. on the northwest tip of the island, talking with a young woman he'd met that day. His friends said he wanted to stay behind and catch a ride back later with another group also out there. They left without him. When he didn't come home that night, his mother reported him missing, setting off a 2-day search involving the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, the Coast Guard, and volunteer search and rescue groups including the United Cajun Navy. A National Park Service ranger found a body in the water off the northwest tip of the island on the morning of July 7th. The family confirmed it was Nolan. That's where the story stood after our last update. Since then, it hasn't slowed down. It's gotten more complicated. Stage 4. The attorney, and why a family hires one this early. One of the earliest major developments was the family retaining Ben Crump, the civil rights attorney known for representing the families of George Floyd, Trayvon Martin, and Breonna Taylor. Crump has said publicly that the family will not rest until every fact about what happened to Nolan on Horn Island comes into the light. We put a question to civil rights attorney Joe Richardson, who has worked cases built on similar facts. Why hire an attorney like Crump this early, before toxicology results are even back? He said it comes down to everything the family doesn't know. Once a body is buried, he said, it can't tell you anything more. So an attorney's job at this stage is largely about securing an independent autopsy and applying pressure on whoever is supposed to be investigating. Richardson also didn't shy away from the more uncomfortable layer underneath all of this. Retaining an attorney of Crump's caliber, he said, is often the first step toward figuring out whether there's a foundation for a future lawsuit, finding the gaps in an investigation and asking pointedly why they haven't been filled. That brings us to the independent autopsy itself. The state medical examiner performed its own autopsy back on July 7th, but officials said full results, including toxicology, could take a couple of weeks. Crump has said the independent autopsy, ordered by the family and conducted separately, could return results sooner, explaining to national media that the family has real concerns about how the state of Mississippi might handle this investigation, and that they wanted a team with no allegiance to the state involved. Richardson framed it as a family looking both ways before crossing the street. The body, he said, is one of the most important pieces of evidence in this entire case. If there's trauma inconsistent with a drowning, that reshapes everything. He also raised something more pointed, that in some cases, once a narrative has taken shape, a state medical examiner can feel pressure to simply close the book rather than keep digging. He was careful to say that isn't necessarily what's happening here, but it's exactly the kind of concern an independent review exists to address. And he named the tension directly. This is happening in the Deep South, during a politically charged moment, involving one black teenager and several white friends. Under those circumstances, he said, there's a real scenario where people choose sides before all the facts are in, and an independent autopsy, at minimum, helps take some of that pressure off. We push back on the timeline. If the state needs weeks for toxicology, how does an independent review move faster? Richardson didn't dodge it. He said there's a legitimate argument that faster isn't automatically more thorough, but he also said plainly that an independent autopsy isn't cheap, which is exactly why most families never pursue one in the first place. Even if it doesn't answer everything immediately, it can surface certain findings faster than the public system typically allows, and it gives the family their own set of results to weigh against whatever the state ultimately concludes. Here's where this story took a turn nobody was expecting. One of the loudest new voices in this case isn't a reporter or an attorney. It's a sitting judge. Chancery Judge Ashley Cole's son, Warren, was one of the friends on that boat with Nolan. For days, she said nothing publicly. And in a case like this, silence gets filled by everyone else, speculation, accusations, and reportedly, threats aimed at teenagers who haven't been charged with anything. Eventually, she posted a lengthy statement. She said her family, along with the whole community, grieves Nolan's loss, and that Warren loved him dearly. She said she deactivated her own social media given how heightened emotions have gotten online, and that she fears for the safety of her children. She and her husband have 6 of them, and doesn't believe it's appropriate for photos of minors to circulate given the potential threats involved. She also shared something personal. She graduated high school with Christine, Nolan's mother. They're from the same community. She said she has the utmost respect for the Wells family, and that her own family mourns right alongside them. Then she addressed the investigation directly. Neither she nor her husband were on Horn Island at any point on July 4th. No one in her family, she said, is trying to impede the investigation or hamper the Wells family's search for answers. Warren was interviewed by the Jackson County Sheriff's Office and, according to her, cooperated fully. She laid out a timeline of her own. Warren last saw Nolan around 3 p.m. The group left around 4:30 p.m. after the boat started taking on water, a problem with the bilge pump. Nolan, she said, made the decision to stay behind and return later with another group of friends. She closed by defending her decision to step back from social media, saying there was nothing behind it beyond wanting to protect her family, and that she hoped her statement would help redirect attention back to the Wells family's grief and their need for community support. We took that statement to Richardson to help unpack it. He pointed out something worth sitting with. Judges generally avoid making public statements precisely because they're judges, so the fact that she chose to speak here is notable on its own. He also raised a more uncomfortable point about small communities. Jackson County is likely small enough that a sitting judge has real proximity to the prosecutor or to people connected to the investigating agency and the coroner's office. He was careful to say that isn't an accusation of wrongdoing. But he said if you're the Wells family, that web of familiarity doesn't necessarily put you at ease. He also flagged something about the framing itself. Judge Cole's statement talked about the family's grief. It didn't talk about the family's need for justice. Richardson said that's a real distinction, and how you read it depends entirely on where you're sitting. And he kept coming back to the same detail we keep coming back to: the phone. According to Judge Cole's own account, the boat left in a hurry, dealing with a mechanical problem. But Nolan's phone still ended up back with his mother, in his friend's hands, not his. Richardson's question was simple. If you're leaving a friend behind on a remote island, even in a rush, wouldn't it occur to somebody to leave his phone with him? He called it circumstantial, not forensic. Not proof of anything on its own, but exactly the kind of detail that keeps this story from resolving cleanly. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office has put out an updated appeal, asking anyone who was on or near Horn Island on July 4th to come forward with original, unedited photos or video from that day. They've said even information that feels insignificant could end up matching, and notably, they've confirmed there are no surveillance cameras anywhere on the island, which makes any personal footage from that day significantly more valuable. Richardson's read on that kind of appeal was straightforward. At this stage, an investigating agency doesn't want to be picky about what comes in. Even secondhand information that wouldn't hold up as direct testimony can point investigators towards something worth chasing down. This case has also moved well beyond Mississippi. Congressman Benny Thompson has publicly urged investigators to conduct a transparent and timely investigation. The NAACP has issued its own statement of support for Nolan's family and friends. At this point, you've got a nationally known civil rights attorney, a sitting judge, a sitting member of Congress, and a national civil rights organization all connected in some way to a case that started as a search for one missing teenager on a barrier island. And in the middle of all of it is a mother trying to grieve in public. Christine has continued to post, describing this as the worst period of their lives, and describing the pain of watching Nolan's siblings process their own grief on top of it. She's asked for prayers and for the public to respect the family's privacy. Here's something this family is now dealing with that has nothing to do with the actual facts of the investigation and everything to do with how fast this story has spread online. Fabricated, AI-generated videos have begun circulating, some appearing to show Christine saying she won't be holding a funeral for her son, others appearing to show Nolan himself. None of it is real. Christine posted one of these fake clips to her own page, calling it out directly and asking people to leave her family alone. We asked Richardson whether a family in this position has any real legal recourse. He said honestly, the law hasn't fully caught up to this yet, but he laid out a few possible paths. Knowingly publishing something false can potentially support a defamation claim, depending on the jurisdiction. There's a possible emotional distress claim, intentional or negligent, depending on the facts. And if someone is profiting off this content through clicks or engagement, there's potentially a claim tied to using someone's name, image, and likeness without permission. His broader point is worth sitting with. This case already carries real racial and political weight. Now add people with entirely different motives running with the story, sometimes making fake content look real, sometimes doing the reverse, and it becomes harder for anyone, family included, to sort out what's actually true. Which brings us to tonight's biggest update. Crump sat down with national media and revealed something that hadn't been said publicly before. Messages were deleted from Nolan's phone before it was ever returned to his family. Crump laid it out plainly. The friends on the boat say Nolan chose to stay behind, but they left with his phone. That detail alone wasn't sitting right with the family. And once they got the phone back, they found messages had been deleted, and they're still trying to understand why. This changes the nature of the phone question entirely. Up until now, it was a matter of judgment. Why would you leave without a friend's phone, even by accident? Now it's something more. If messages were deliberately removed at some point between Horn Island and Nolan's front door, that's not an oversight. That's an action somebody took on purpose. It's worth noting, for anyone wondering whether this means the information is gone for good, deleted text messages, in most cases, aren't actually gone the moment someone hits delete. Depending on the device, how much time has passed, and whether it was ever backed up, forensic examiners can often recover deleted messages through standard data extraction methods that both law enforcement and private investigators have access to. So if those messages exist somewhere in a cloud backup or in unallocated storage on the device itself, there's a real chance either investigators or Crump's own team recover them. Whatever they say, they could end up being one of the most consequential pieces of evidence in this entire case. And then there's the detail that might matter most of all. Crump laid out a direct contradiction between two separate accounts of the same handful of minutes. The young woman Nolan was last seen talking to has reportedly said Nolan told her he was heading back to rejoin his friends on the boat. The friends, meanwhile, say Nolan told them he was staying behind with her. Crump's response to that contradiction was blunt. All we know for certain is that Nolan is dead. Sit with that for a second. Two separate people, or two separate groups of people, describing the exact same few minutes on that beach, and their accounts point in opposite directions. That's not internet speculation. That's not a theory built off a shaky viral clip. That is the family's own attorney laying out, on national television, a direct conflict between actual witness accounts. Somebody's memory is wrong, or somebody isn't telling the full story. And right now, nobody outside that small circle of people knows which one it is. Let's bring it all together. We know Nolan went to Horn Island with friends he'd made that same trip with many times before. We know he stayed behind around 3 p.m. without his phone, after the group's boat developed engine trouble and had to head back early. We know his body was found 4 days later, close to the same stretch of beach where he was last seen. We know the family has retained Ben Crump and ordered an independent autopsy separate from the state's own. We know a sitting judge whose son was on that boat has now spoken publicly with her own detailed account of the day. We know messages were deleted from Nolan's phone before his family ever got it back. And we know there are now two directly conflicting accounts of the very last real conversation anyone had with Nolan. What we still don't know is almost everything that actually matters. We don't know the official cause of death. We don't know who deleted those messages, when, or why, or what they said. We don't know which account of that final conversation is accurate, or whether either one fully is. And we still don't know if the video that first drew national attention to this case has anything real to do with what happened to Nolan at all. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office has continued to say publicly that they have not found evidence of foul play. Given everything that's surfaced in just the last few days, it's not hard to understand why Nolan's family isn't ready to accept that as the final word. And it's worth saying plainly that no one in this case, including Warren or anyone else in that friend group, has been charged with any crime. Cooperating with an investigation and being the subject of hard questions is not the same thing as being accused of wrongdoing. And this family, the Wells family and the friends' families both, deserve better than trial by internet before a single official finding has been released. We're going to stay on this exactly the way we always have. As the independent autopsy results come back, as those deleted messages are potentially recovered, and as this investigation moves one way or the other, we'll bring you the facts as we actually get them, verified, and not a moment before. If tonight's update helped you actually understand where this case stands instead of just adding to the noise, that's the whole point of what we do here. Hit subscribe so you're here for the next one, because between the deleted messages, the independent autopsy, and these fake AI videos targeting Nolan's own mother, this case is not slowing down. Drop your thoughts below, but please, keep it to what's actually been confirmed tonight. There are real families on both sides of this who are still grieving, and teenagers who haven't been charged with anything are already receiving threats over speculation alone. We'll see you next time, everybody.